Okay, good afternoon. So great that you're here on this chilly day, the last day that the University of Michigan is open until Friday, I've heard. They've canceled Wednesday and Thursday, which is, I've been here since 1989. They don't do that, so it better be cold. Anyway, I'm so excited that you're here. My name is Jane Dutton, and I'm one of the faculty members affiliated with the center, also one of the co-founders of the center. I'm semi-retired, still keeping my foot in the game with the opportunity to host great speakers, and I'm very excited about what we're about to hear today. For how many of you is this the first Positive Links? Oh, actually quite a bit. Okay, good. Well, you know that the Center for Positive Organizations is all about research and practice designed to help people flourish at work. And we do lots of wonderful work with students, obviously as a university, with researchers, and with organizational/business people in all different kinds of organizations. We hope that you've been to our website, that you've enjoyed some of the Positive Links videos that we've had on from the last couple, I think 5 years. It's a real treasure trove of really important ideas. I also want to thank the various sponsors of this series. The Drews and the Joneses, as husband and wife couples, have been really important in providing monetary support for this Positive Links series. And we also have, and it's been flashing on the screen, all these other wonderful centers that are partnering with us in making this Pos Links happen. I am going to, I'm going to go actually to introducing Stephanie Creary, because I don't want to take any more of her time. And for those of you who know me, I really care a lot about introductions. First moments matter. For those of you in my class, you know that. And I've written out Stephanie's introduction this time. I've had to introduce her a couple of times today. This is a different one, so I'm going to read it. Some people are bright lights. You see and feel their energy and contributions even from a distance. I was fortunate to meet Stephanie Creary almost 8 years ago when she was working on her PhD at Boston College. I remember the conversation. It was about identity and her interest in organizational change. I remember thinking about having had that conversation. I've got to watch this young scholar. She's going to make a difference with her passion, her insight, her work ethic, and her courage to walk toward and explore the questions that she really cares about. Her advisors call her fierce, caring, brilliant, refreshing, and innovative. Wharton, one of our competitors, recently stole her from the faculty at Cornell, where she is doing such important work with her classes and research on leading diversity and inclusion in organizations. She's bringing top leaders from all kinds of organizations to open conversations, share insights and practices. Perhaps you've seen her on CNN or NBC News, or maybe you've read her terrific recent piece in Harvard Business Review on how to make room in your work life for the rest of yourself. She's the founding member of the Wharton Idea Lab that addresses identity, diversity, engagement, affect, and social relationships. She's had a very busy day, a type of testimony to the value she brings on the path she is walking. We are so glad to have her here to share her wisdom in her talk titled Creating More Inclusive Workplaces in an Era of Discord, the Power of Helping Across Differences. So Stephanie, it's your turn to take the stage. Thank you. You're welcome. Have fun.
Well, I just have to start by acknowledging how blessed I feel to be here today at the University of Michigan, that I have such strong ties to, not because I was a student here, but because all of the people who have shaped who I am as a scholar received their PhDs from this institution and were students of Jane Dutton's. So I feel so lucky to be here in what I feel is a very full circle moment for myself. And I'd sort of just like to acknowledge a couple of people who have been, I think, Jane's students, who have, I think, certainly encouraged me and motivated me on this path of studying things that at some point in time were not mainstream, and now is the time to, I think, have these conversations that have become so important to us. So Stacy Blake Beard graduated from the University of Michigan in the organizational psychology program. She was my professor at Simmons School of Management, and 2 weeks into my MBA class in organizational behavior told me that I should be a business school professor. That just doesn't happen quite often. She introduced me to Laura Morgan Roberts, who also received her PhD from the University of Michigan, who introduced me to the study of positive identity and diversity and convinced me that these two conversations could go together in a management conversation. And then finally, my dissertation chair, Mike Pratt, who too was a student of Jane Dutton's and a graduate of the University of Michigan Organizational Psychology program, who embraced someone who was really passionate about difference and diversity. And even though that was not the conversation that he was having, he made space for it and continues to make space for it to this day. So I'm very lucky and blessed to be here, and I would like to certainly acknowledge that much of what I'm going to share with you today does come out of this institution by the thought leaders like Jane and others that I've mentioned. And what I try to do in my scholarship is think about how I can add to some of this brilliant work. And I think what I'd like to share with you today is a paradigm around talking about differences that acknowledges how it is important to talk about differences. Because it's in talking about our differences and acknowledging where those are and where we've been that we're able to help each other learn, grow, and thrive. So I am a scholar. So that means that I start my talks by giving you my conceptual anchors. What are the conversations that I want you to be thinking about as I'm walking us through these ideas? The first is I'm firmly rooted in a perspective that high-quality relationships are important in organizations. Not only to us as individuals, the benefits that they give us, they help us to feel healthier from a physical and psychological perspective. They help us to engage in tasks that we have to carry out, and they help to increase our willingness and our capacity to learn. For organizations, they help us to coordinate our work, to want to collaborate with one another, to develop stronger attachments so that we want to stay in an organization. At the same time, our relationships are not unidimensional. They come from us having developed and cultivated over a period of time different identities. When I think about who I am as a person, I don't just think about who I want to be. I think about who are the people who have helped me to be where I am today. And that's what's represented as part of my identities. Such that when somebody asks me to only be one thing, I'm thinking about who I'm losing, who I'm not bringing along when I'm asked to simplify my identity. So much of my research is about embracing your complexity, because it's also about embracing your relationships that you've built and that have allowed you to come to be where you are. In earlier work with Brianna Kaza, also a graduate of the University of Michigan, and Laura Morgan Roberts, we developed a conceptualization of understanding how the ways in which we acknowledge, include, or exclude who we are at work fundamentally can shape the quality of our relationships at work. So today I'm going to focus on what we call high-quality generative relationships. These are relationships that produce resources. For me, it's about the energy, the life, the vitality that I gain from being able to express different parts of myself at work. But it's also about things that are more tangible, like knowledge and information and new tasks that by sharing who we are, we're able to tap into in ways that we wouldn't be able to tap into if we just acknowledged only unidimensional aspects of who we are. The last part that I want to give you as a way of setting the stage is this notion of what I mean by helping. And I want to take a broad conceptualization of helping as responsiveness. And this is work by Reese and Gable, which talks about helping and responsiveness as being the sense of how partners attend to and support each other's needs and goals broadly. So that could include things like mentoring, that could include things like giving someone support on a task. But this notion of responding in the moment to someone's needs and them responding to your needs in the moment, with this notion of this responding process cycle that they talk about includes understanding, validation, and caring. Now, I give you all that positivity before I acknowledge the current context. And it really is the current context which drives the ideas that I'm going to talk to you about today. If I would have given this talk 5 years ago, it would have been much different. I would have gone to what I just shared and then told you how we begin to leap, which is the framework I'm going to give you, into a space of getting to know one another better. But I do feel like the motivation for all of the energy around diversity and inclusion right now, and my paradigm for talking about helping across differences, is rooted in where we have been for the last 2 years, and is fundamentally rooted in the experiences that my students at the Wharton School have shared with me. It's to acknowledge that in the moment and in the current context, there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of motivation to engage, but a lot of fear about what happens when we begin to engage with our differences. And so I want to acknowledge that and also give you a little bit of my interpretation of what's happened that's motivated us to want to talk about the power of helping across differences. So Albert Bandura, a famed social psychologist, has done a lot of work, social learning theory, to look at what helps to create conditions of aggressive or punishment. Why might we behave aggressively toward another person? And in this paper, what he and his co-authors revealed was that when we dehumanize people, we label them and call them names and refer to them as animals, you name your term, we are more likely to behave aggressively toward them and to want to punish them. But when we humanize them, when we talk about them as being people with hearts, with thoughts, with actions, we actually are less likely to want to engage aggressively toward them. At the same time, when we believe that our behavior is not our own, but representative of a collective, we are actually more likely to behave aggressively toward someone. But when we begin to take personal responsibility for our own actions, we are less likely to engage aggressively towards someone. So your takeaway here is that where I believe we are right now is in a cycle of aggression, of aggressive acts toward other people that have been perpetuated by a cycle of dehumanization and a lack of personal responsibility for our actions. And so what I want to talk about today is how we begin to get out of this place that many of us are sort of tired of being in. I flashed this image just to give you a sense. I always feel overwhelmed when I show this slide because this captures for me a lot of what I feel when I think about the dehumanization, when I think about the lack of personal responsibility, when I think about the aggression. And it's these images and these sets of events that have happened over the past 2 to 3 years that I think have left people craving for understanding how we can begin to help one another across our differences in ways that create learning and growth. So today I'm going to talk about a framework for repairing what Jocelyn calls the space between us. So it's not necessarily about myself as Stephanie and what I need in this moment, or you in what you need in this moment. It's about us. And how do we begin to repair that space in between us? Because that space in between us is what we need to be able to grow and thrive so that we can reach all those positive benefits for ourselves and for our organizations. So I said space, knowing that it might feel like a chasm. And it might feel like in order to cross that space or repair that space, it might require somewhat of a leap. And that's the image that I want to give you as we walk through the rest of our time together is this is not easy stuff. And I think what I'm going to share with you is going to sound like, oh, well, that sounds simple. It's not. So acknowledging that that space might be quite large, but I do believe that it is surmountable in a way that's about growing and learning from it. So the power of helping across differences. Where we're going is this idea that helping across differences can help to foster 3 experiences: inclusion, belonging, and respect. And that's in fostering inclusion, belonging, and respect that we can all grow individually and collectively. And I'm going to break this down a little bit. So this framework, the LEAP framework as I'm calling it, acknowledges that we all want to be able to grow from our relationships. This is what Miller, Stiver, and the relational cultural theorists refer to as growth in connection. And it's acknowledging that without us, it's hard for me to be, to learn, to grow, to contribute. So being in connection with someone is fundamentally important to creating an experience that I may not be able to create on my own. So how do we get there? By deepening the focus on the relationship, by actually engaging in relational acts and helping to build and grow the relationship is the primary resource. And so the idea is that by deepening the relationship, we help to increase the growth that we receive or that we achieve from our connection through this LEAP framework that I will unpack in a bit. And each step of the LEAP framework helps to build more and more inclusion, belonging, and respect, and ultimately drives the growth process. So I think it's helpful first to talk about what I mean by inclusion, belonging, and respect. These are certainly words that we see a lot on the covers of newspapers, in organizations. We throw them out there. But what I have learned is that we don't necessarily all have same understandings of these words. So let me sort of just tell you exactly what I mean. When I think about inclusion, I think about the act of valuing our differences, of not asking us to be similar, but rather asking us to share what makes us unique and what our different experiences are that we bring to an organization that can help to create possibilities. I think of this experience here that happened. This was a conversation about race at Goldman Sachs that happened a few years ago. And it was convened as a way of helping the firm to deal with the shootings of unarmed black men that were starting to create in the organization a sense of distrust, mistrust, and alienation amongst their workers across different races. And so the CEO decided to convene the senior-most partners in the firm, who are all people of color, to talk about what does race mean for us today, and how does that shape our workplace experiences. So not beginning to, I think, ignore that race matters, but inviting a conversation about race as a way of acknowledging and helping people in the workplace to understand that we know that we have different experiences and that is inherently valuable for us as an organization to be able to talk about these experiences. By belonging, I mean this idea of feeling connected and connecting both socially and emotionally to other people. My colleague Sigal Barsaid has done work on loneliness, which is the opposite of what I'm talking about, and how oftentimes through feeling lonely at work, we don't want to stay, we don't want to contribute. I'm talking about belonging, the social connectedness, the emotional connectedness that makes us want to actually get up and go to work every day and to get our work done. And then finally, by respect, for me, it's a sense of feeling heard and feeling valued, not because we've achieved a certain status, but because we are human, and every human deserves the right to feel respect and to feel heard and feel valued. And I think of, in my neighborhood in Philly, this past April, I believe it was, March or April, when there was the national televised incident about the two black men who were arrested for sitting in a Starbucks and not leaving when they were asked to. And so much of the conversation at that time in the organization, in Starbucks, and I think in the community, was about respect. And how do we show one another respect? And how much it felt disrespectful to have the police, an emergency provider, called for what felt like a simple disagreement. And so this LEAP framework, again, is this idea that through each process that I'll talk about, the helping across differences, we're able to push the needle on inclusion, belonging, and respect a bit more. Now, by helping, I'm going to talk about two types of helping. First, helping to see, and then helping to do. So what do I mean by helping to see? So I've compiled for you insights from several of my ongoing research projects that I feel adequately capture in a narrative way people's experiences with either helping someone else to see or helping someone else to do across differences. So this first example is a senior manager at a company that I call Servco. It's a pseudonym. And this is a senior manager who's actually French, talking about his experiences, learning what his African-American colleague was experiencing in the context of race in the workplace and how that helped him to feel closer to this coworker. So he says, the African American senior manager explained to me what it was to be an African American in the U.S. I realized it was very different from the situation in other countries, specifically in Europe, where he's from, because the evolution of our history was very different, extremely different. And so we had many conversations about this. And what this actually invited them to do was to begin creating a larger narrative about diversity and a strategy around managing diversity in the workplace and how that would help to support the careers, not just of underrepresented minorities, but of other people who were similarly struggling with being seen and being heard in the organization. This second example is from an ongoing research study that I have looking at the experiences of Army officers, particularly white American Army officers and black American Army officers, mostly male, with explaining how they arrived at their positions, their senior level. So how do they narrate their career experiences? What are the resources that they talk about that have helped them to accumulate and to amass the success that they have so far? And what we've learned is that, unsurprisingly, they talk about the different opportunities that they have had. Now, this is an officer, this is actually a white male officer who's talking about women in the military and recognizing that men and women in the military have had different opportunities by design. It hasn't been too long since women were allowed in combat roles. And he's speaking to the shock that many of the military officers have had around having women as leaders in some of these roles that previously women weren't allowed to have. And he says, the women in the military is a big deal, right? That's been a big topic for a long time. There are guys that ask me about that right now because they have not been in there with a woman yet. They are in artillery units. I tell them straight up, I say, I've had 3 female lieutenants. All 3 of them were awesome. All 3 of them were probably my top 5% of lieutenants out of the 38 in our battalion. So the need to help others see the leadership possibilities that women who previously were not allowed to have leadership roles in the Army could have, and their ability to be effective in these roles just like everyone else. And then also helping others to see that no one does it alone. This is hard. I think many of us, particularly if you're a person who is educated, likes to believe in our own agency, that we got here by our sheer grit and perseverance and willpower. But when I ask people stories about their career success, they begin to name the people and the experiences that they've had that have helped them to be where they are. This example to me is particularly powerful because this is somebody who's recognizing the role of her family and how her family, in being there and supporting her, has allowed her to be a professional. So this is a tenured associate professor, a biology professor, who's talking about her ability to be able to be a successful scientist and to get tenure in her university was predicated on the role that her mother played in her career. And she says, I had 1 child and then realized that I didn't make enough money to both work and pay for childcare. And my mother came to live with me and my husband, and I think that's actually been really important because my kids are really important to me. And I would have left the field had my mother not. I would have stopped doing this job if my mom wasn't there to really help me develop as a professional. And then finally, if we have people who help us to see across our differences, we also have people who help us to do the things that we would like to do that we cannot do alone when we are different. And so this is an example of a person who is an ER, an emergency room technician, talking about how she helps people, particularly those who she feels are unable to advocate for themselves, navigate the very busy emergency department in her hospital. She says, if you are sick and if you are a patient, I'm going to help you. And I'm prejudiced for the elderly. I will push them in front of anybody. Just the other day, an 87-year-old lady was sitting out there in the ED waiting room for almost 4 hours. That's actually short because the average wait time in this ED is 8 hours. And sometimes we get so busy, we don't really realize that they have been sitting there that long. So I went to the charge nurse and I'm like, can you please bring this 87-year-old lady back? Like, she shouldn't have to be out there like that. So she talks about her role as somebody who is not 87, but recognizing somebody else cannot advocate for themselves and helping this woman to effectively cut the process line that had been put in place to manage the ED flow. My last example of we cannot do alone is something that is not based on my research, but is based on an experience that I had in the last couple of weeks attending the Power Shift Summit in Washington, D.C., which was sponsored by the Freedom Forum. And the Freedom Forum is an organization that is charged with trying to build greater integrity in the news media. And so this was a meeting of people across journalism at some of the name your organization you want to talk about. They were there actually talking about how they have grown in the post-Me Too era and what are some of the particular strategies that they've put in place in order to help them to cultivate a workplace of respect and one that felt like it was filled with greater integrity. And so there is this larger project. You can feel free to go to their website. They're in the process of beginning to put resources up there for the public. But one particular example that I loved, and I did find a citation to it online, was NPR, National Public Radio, shared an example. So they had a very public incident with a senior level manager who left, given these sexual harassment claims. And that damaged the organization, and it resulted in the employees feeling a lack of distrust, not just in management, but in one another. And so one of the ideas that was birthed through this process is the creation of a peer support group, with this idea that this peer support group wasn't just something that people could use to vent. It was actually a resource for helping people to navigate how they would begin to share these painful experiences and how they would report them. And so they didn't have to feel like they were alone, which is the reason why many people don't report these incidents, is because they feel like they're the only one who has had them and they fear retaliation. So NPR has reported some good outcomes with respect to this peer support group, and understanding that it is only as if we as a collective can, I think, support people in their painful moments that they are able to give voice to their own experiences. So I'm going to concentrate on giving you the L, the E, the A, and the P. You have been waiting eagerly to know what those mean. And so LEAP, most colloquially, I will say, is about looking, engaging, appreciating, and providing. More conceptually, I think of looking as noticing, engaging as connecting, appreciating as valuing, and providing as responding. And here's what I refer to as related experiences, because I believe it's in the looking that you're also learning and letting people talk and listing things that might be important and listening. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to engage with this LEAP framework for the next bit of time. I want you to practice helping each other across your differences. And the exercise that you should have the handout already. If you don't, if you raise your hand, someone will give it to you in just a minute. This is what I call the one thing exercise. I'm in the process of developing a number of exercises using the LEAP framework. I've mostly been using these in my course at the Wharton School. I teach a diversity course. I have undergraduates in one section and MBA students in a different section. And as I'm trying to make concrete these very big ideas, I developed this one thing exercise. And it's called one thing because that's usually what the students ask me for. Is they're like, Professor, what's one thing I could do in response to everything you just told us that I can take with me to help build more effective relationships across difference? So that's why it's called the one thing exercise. So let me tell you about it first, and then I'll instruct you through the process of engaging in it. So in the one thing exercise, the L is for looking, and you'll start by looking within and self-reflecting in a written way. Then you will engage, but this is a silent engagement. This is actually just exchanging the things that you've just written with someone else. Then you will begin the process of appreciating what was on the to list, what was both similar and different about the things that you wrote. And then the final part, which is really the power of helping across differences, is providing and suggesting the type of help that you could provide to the other person, and you suggesting the type of, or them suggesting the type of help that they could provide to you, and you suggesting the type of help that you could provide to them, given what you have just learned about the other person. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, some of you know each other in this room, and unless you know each other and you know that you have a difference that you want to explore, I'm going to ask you to choose someone who you don't know. So feel free to choose someone you know if you know that there is a difference. But if all you're going to do is talk about your similarities, this activity isn't going to work. So you're going to choose a partner who you think differs from you in some way, demographically, hierarchically, or professionally. And I've had students who have tried this any number of ways and it ends up working out to be the same experience, and who you would like to get to know better for some reason. That could just be the stranger sitting next to you. So step one, I'm going to talk you through first, is you're going to go ahead, and this is actually written on the paper. You're going to spend the next few minutes on that piece of paper listing the following information. The first bullet point says, one thing you think makes you different from this person. That may just be a surface level, they're wearing a red jacket and I'm wearing a blue coat. One thing you think you have in common with this person. Perhaps we're both interested in helping across differences because we all showed up here today together. One thing you think you would like this person to know about you. I'm a person who cares passionately about equity and social justice, and I like people to know that about me. One thing you think you can do to help this person at work in their professional life. I consider myself somebody who bridges effectively or tries to academics and practice. And so if you need a translator because you're in academia to help translate to practice, I feel like I can help you. If you are a practitioner who's trying to figure out what the academics are saying, I feel like I can do that. And I know that because I feel like that's something that I already is a strength that I have to offer people. And then one thing that you think this person can do to help you at work and in your professional life. I need to know the other bridge builders out there because I cannot be the only bridge builder. So if you are a person who effectively builds bridges between academics and practitioners, I would love to meet you because there is a whole world of people out there who are just craving for this bridge building process. So that's the type of stuff that you will write down on that page. Let me walk through the other parts for the people who are dialing in virtually who don't have the handout, and then I'm going to release you all to do this work on your own. Step two is engaging. This will be the process of exchanging lists with that person who you've identified you want to get to know better. And what you will do is you're just going to read and review and reflect silently without talking what you've read on the lists. I will call time. And then you will begin a process of engaging or appreciating, comparing what was similar about your lists and what was different about your lists. You can also write those things down as you go along because you're going to take this paper with you and hopefully we'll create some learning after today. And the last part is the part that sort of feels right now a little disconnected, but I promise you, as you begin to engage in steps 1, 2, and 3, step 4 will feel a bit natural because the context of your conversation of getting to know one another, your identities, and getting to know what you value is going to help trigger how you think you can provide them help. So you're going to end this activity by naming one thing you think you can do to help the other person learn and grow at work. How I think I can help them and how they think they can help me is ultimately what you're going to write down after you've had that conversation. Is there anybody else who needs a handout? Raise your hand and they will make sure that you get one. And down front here. Okay. So I'm going to give you some time. I will call time when I would like you to begin exchanging the list. But just take a few minutes to start with step 1 by answering those 5 bullet points, and then I'll cue you for step 2. So it's almost silent. We're doing pretty good, pretty good. I will give you about 2 to 3 more minutes. So just so you know how much time you have. For step 1, just for step 1. So some people are starting to finish, and if you're starting to finish and you're making eye contact with your partner and they're similarly finished, feeling like they're finished, feel free to exchange lists. But again, just take some time, maybe about 2 minutes, to just read what's there and let it digest. And then what I will do is I will let you know when you can begin talking about what you've read. Hold your hand up if you still need time to read the other person's list. Okay, we still have quite a few people. So let's take another minute or 2 just to have time to read the other person's list. And when you're ready, you can feel free to move on to step 3, which is begin comparing. What did you find? I see people nodding as they're reading people's lists, like, okay, that's pretty interesting. What was similar on your lists and what was different on your lists? And feel free to write down some notes on that as well. And so the last part is just step 4, is I want you to end your conversation. You can take a few more minutes to discuss the similarities and differences if I just rudely interrupted you, but I just wanted to add the last part, which is end by naming one thing that you think you can do, particularly given the context of your conversation and what you just learned about that person in the last 6 minutes. One thing you think you can do to help the other person learn and grow at work, and I actually invite you to write this down. It actually creates accountability later.
Oh, I think I just heard feedback. Is it because I went under a mic?
Probably because we're a little close to these speakers.
Okay, for a speaker. Did you test these? Did you test them? Did you test them out here?
I tested them right before.
What?
I hate to stop what I presume are very generative conversations, but I think people watching from home would love to know what it is that you all are talking about. I actually am very curious. All I hear is buzz, 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 and I would love to know and get some feedback on what you all are talking about just to sort of enrich our conversation a bit more. So we have 2 people going around with, these are tossable microphones, which I've just learned exist. They are soft, but you should probably try to catch them if they are tossed to you. My question for you is who is willing to share their experience with doing this one thing exercise? What did you learn about yourself or the other person? And what have you committed to the other person? What help have you committed to the other person, at least in the short term, as part of this task? So feel free to raise your hand and you will be tossed a microphone. Right down front. Uh-huh.
Thank you. That way I was sure to catch it. I'm Gretchen. I was partnered with Lindy. By the way, Lindy is our amazing brand new faculty member joining our M&O group from Stanford. So you'll be seeing a lot more of her in the coming months and years. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for a great talk too. But for me, this was great. So Lindy and I have been getting to know each other, through the recruiting process and, accepting an offer process, and now we're starting to think about the onboarding process. And I thought this was actually just a great way for 2 people who were going to be working very closely together over many years to get to know each other at a deeper level.
Yes.
more quickly. So we had some ideas about how we can be helpful to each other in kind of increasing the capacity for us to grow this relationship quickly well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Who's next? More brave souls. Oh, right over there. Thank you. In the back. There you go. Nice catch.
Hello, my name's Roger Newton. I'm an executive in residence at the Ross School of Business and the Center for Positive Organizations. And I was sitting in the back, and so I hopped over a row as I saw Gabby, who is an LSNA student, and I began asking questions about what her career is and what she wants to do, and found out that we're new neighbors, believe it or not. I just moved up to Traverse City area, and she's from Traverse City. Went to Traverse City Central and has worked for a insurance company called HighQuality in Traverse City this summer. And I started talking to her about, or suggesting that there's a great 6-week session coming up in May through the middle of June called Magnify.
Okay, great.
Everybody here, how many people here have been part of Magnify? Can you raise your hands?
Quite a few.
And it was her first time coming here to see Positive Link series. So we got to know each other a little bit, and who knows, we may see each other up in Traverse City sometime.
And how did you end your conversation about step 4, providing help?
I provided help by suggesting that she go online, look at the Magnify course.
And Gabby,
and if she has any questions, further questions, I'm going to leave my email with her.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. All right,
you,
who's
Gabby.
next? Yes.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's Orvi. I'm a BBA senior here at the business school. So my partner was Ethan, and we are actually both on the BBA Student Council together. And so it was kind of interesting hearing about how we could help each other, because we've never actually had one of these conversations, even though you would think that we have had that before. So one thing that we both realized was both of us have a positive attitude, and we both kind of knew that. But what our differences kind of that we found were our initial ideas of one another and how we kind of perceived each other. And so his advice to me was actually really helpful, and something that I want to take with me as I graduate and go into my career, and really be less worried about the work that I'm doing and allow that to speak for itself. And that's something that I appreciate.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Let's take a couple more. Anyone? One more? Jane?
I got it. You got it? I won't throw it for you.
I mean, I just want to say what it did for me is really activated a deep interest in learning more about, it's CAT, right? Yep. CAT. And we found a lot of joint interest beyond what we first listed, just in a very brief period of time. Mostly we've just exchanged emails so we can stay in touch, because I think we can help each other with different kinds of resources. And I got very excited about what she wants to do with her career.
Right.
So it just it was, I've never seen a structured exercise like this that happened so quickly.
Yes.
Where I feel connected, and it makes me want to be more connected in the future.
Right.
So thank you, and
Great.
thank you, Kat.
Thank you. Thank you all for, I think, engaging in that and sharing. Certainly when my students, I did this exercise for the first time last quarter, and I got the similar reactions from the students. It was sort of great to have a chance to get to know one another in a structured way, to begin to think about the ways in which we perceive one another, and sometimes how they're confirmed or disconfirmed in that moment. And there's something about the suggesting how you could help, or you can ask for help in that moment, that I feel like really is what people value and ultimately take away from the exercise. So that's actually, for some people, this is a relationship you've been cultivating for some time. This doesn't mean that this is actually the hardest or the most complicated relationship that might exist in a workplace. So then the question then arises, how do we think about this exercise in the context of a particularly difficult relationship at work? What changes? And so this is where we sort of step back and say, The looking, the engaging, the appreciating, and the providing is really what I would like you to take away as you think about building and beginning to help and create positive relationships across difference. So how do you look or notice moments where you can connect? It's the anticipation of the connecting with that person that maybe you've been avoiding, because that's what we do, is we avoid the people who are complicated in our lives. But how do you take more of a positive learning, attempting to grow in connection with somebody who maybe you've been avoiding for different reasons? So looking for an opening to walk through. How do you then engage or connect with that person? Is it sending an email and saying, hey, I would love to go out for a coffee at lunchtime, and surprise them because maybe they too have been avoiding you, which is usually the case. The feeling is often mutual. So how do you then engage? Invite them off for coffee or stop them at the water cooler and say, hey, how's your day going today? When we think about appreciating or valuing in the act of engaging in a conversation that hopefully happens at that coffee session, maybe you're asking them about themselves, how their day is, what projects they're working in. How do you give them positive feedback, saying, I think that that's interesting that you're doing that work. I actually think the work that you're doing is valuable to the work that I'm doing. I love that you're sharing these stories about your kids, because I have kids as well, and I think it's great when colleagues can talk about who they are outside of their work selves. That's the appreciating or the valuing aspect. It's actually in doing those things, noticing, looking for an opening, connecting, and then appreciating the moment and what is happening in that time, that makes it easier to then begin to engage in a different way. By actually taking that leap and reaching and offering help to somebody who may not expect it from you because maybe your relationship has been complicated in the past, that's where you begin to actually repair whatever it was that became complicated or became a source of strain. So I hope that helps you to understand how you might take this practice exercise, which is actually part of the P of the LEAP framework, is we have to practice what it means to build bridges before we begin to build bridges in really complicated ways with relationships that are really hard. I hope you can take what we're talking about here today into some of those relationships that might feel as if they become a little strained, either because of the current climax, or maybe because of some other context in which you've been operating in, that you want this relationship to grow more because you believe that it has a capacity to help each one of you thrive in the workplace. I just want to preview for you one more exercise that I'm developing, that maybe the next time you see me I will have more to say about it. I'm going to launch this quarter with my students. And it's the in your shoes exercise, and this takes head on the notion of, this is a person with whom I've had a difficult relationship, and the difficulty in this relationship is that I have been trying to share with them something about myself that may not resonate with them because they have not had that experience before. And I want them to know, and I need them to know this information, but that requires me to put myself in their shoes. And so this exercise, the L, is still about looking, but it's about listening. We actually, as I once had a dance teacher tell me, I need you to look with your ears, which meant listen. Listening. Person A, in this case it could be me, I want to tell this person my story. That may not be their story, but I need them to hear it because it's really important to me and it's really important to us. In the process of listening, we also engage where the other person then begins to ask questions, to inquire about that experience. And it might just be at first saying, I'm really sorry that that happened to you, that you had that experience. Tell me more because I'd like to begin to understand your experience because it's not one that I've had. Appreciating is also where the person is beginning to talk about how they hear and they see the person in that moment, and they value that that experience is one that can be had, even though it might not be your same experience. The P is still about providing help, but it's about providing support. Now, this can be intangible support, something like just expressing empathy or expressing an ear to, that will continue to listen to the experiences that someone might have, regardless of and without feeling fear of judgment. Or it might be something tangible. It might be actually helping the person to respond to that negative experience that they're sharing that one might not share. So that's the next exercise that I'm developing. If anyone here is interested in sharing with me a time where this was something that was real for them, I would love to hear that story, because in hearing people's stories is how I begin to develop these exercises that I think can resonate and help us all. So I want to leave you with this image. Notice the woman in this picture engaging in this tremendous leap. Notice what's below her is a pool, so that if she falls or crashes, sort of feels like it can't hurt that badly. Notice what she has on her chest. It's a life vest. She's not going to drown. And so when I think about what I would like ultimately the LEAP framework and the tool, the one thing exercise to be, the in your shoes exercise to be, is to be that life vest for people to feel as if you don't have to feel as if you have nothing to support you as you begin to build and repair some of these more complicated relationships. But what I want you to ultimately understand is that when we leap, it's not often the act of taking off that we fear, it's the landing. So what if we were to imagine that what could come out of this is a positive, good, healthy relationship as opposed to discord and disconnect? So I invite you to change your perspective on these more complicated relationships, to think about the possibilities, the potential of growth that we can gain from growing in connection with people who are different from us. Thank you very much.
So, now maybe you can see what a successful bridger she is. And what I love about so many of the things that are Stephanie's doing, but what she did for us today is she takes this big issue of diversity and inclusion and bridging across differences, and she takes it down to sort of the everyday experience of a conversation that can be transformative. I don't know about you, but sort of caring about these issues and sort of thinking about big organizational changes that have to happen can really wear me down. But if I think about, just one conversation at a time, building the resources and building the capacity, it makes me, I think in a grounded way, genuinely more hopeful. So thank you for your work, and we have filled her bag with artifacts today. So this is the final treasured artifact of a spiral to signify the generative dynamic. So please, again, join me in thanking Stephanie for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And this is just an invitation to you to February 20th is our next Positive Links. Mandy O'Neill, who's doing fantastic work on emotional cultures in organizations and the difference that they make, will be here. And I'm sure you will enjoy her visit. So stay warm. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Jane. I appreciate it.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
That was so good.